Hey everyone, it's Justine. Welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be creating 5 cards using these 2 stamp sets from Waffle Flower. These are brand new this month. They have coordinating dies in case you're a coordinating die person. And I'm going to be working with the Sunflower Love as well as the Simply Said. Now we're going to drive straight into card number 1, but before we do that, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my new embossing tool. I just recently purchased this. I needed a new one because I moved overseas and I needed something that worked with the electricity. This is a dual setting embossing tool from Wow Embossing Powder, and I love it because it has 2 settings on it. So setting number 1 is pretty much for drying your surfaces when working with paints and mediums and things. And then setting number 2 is for melting embossing powder. Very practical. So let's dive in. I have just prepped my cardstock with an embossing bag so that the embossing powder doesn't stick. I'm going to lay down this large floral cluster from Waffle Flower, and I'm just going to arrange my cardstock so that the flower can be slightly off center of the cardstock. It's going to go off the sides, so I wasn't able to put my Misty in the usual corner to do the stamping. I'm going to ink it up with some Versamark ink and stamp it. And the nice thing about stamping on dark cardstock is you're really easy to see the Versamark ink, so I know if I've missed any areas. Make sure you give a nice hard push in the center of those flowers. They are quite detailed and it's quite easy to miss a little spot, which is why I went back in with my Misty tool just to add some more pressure there. I'm going to be using some gold embossing powder from Wow. This is a really pretty gold. It's called Metallic Gold Rich, and it gives it sort of an antique gold look when it's all embossed. And I'm just going to give my card a flick here to get rid of any excess embossing powder, funnel the powder back into the jar, and then we're ready to heat emboss it. You can see here how awesome the tool works. It melts the embossing powder right away with very little warping on my cardstock. Speaking of cardstock, I'm using Gina K Designs in the Navy cardstock. I've also cut myself off a strip, or I have the scrap strip laying around. I'm going to test my colored pencils here. I'm using 3 colors from my Prismacolor 150 set. I am using Indigo Blue, Indanthrone Blue, and Periwinkle. I wanted to have a dark, a medium, and a light color, and these ones showed up really nicely on the cardstock. I'm going to go through the basics of how I colored one of these petals, and then I'll go ahead and color the rest off screen. I've gone ahead and I've added the darkest color, the indigo blue, and I'm adding this to the very base of the petal closest to the center. There's also a piece on the left you can see and on the right that are folding over, and I believe those ones there would have quite a shadow on them if the light was shining on this card. I'm going to add a little bit from the top as well, since this petal seems to be curving towards the center, and then I'm going to flick a little bit towards the center. I'm going to now go in with my medium color, and I'm going to go over top of the darkest color, flicking a little bit more into the center than before. And this is going to help blend the 2 colors. The Indanthrone Blue and the Indigo Blue really blend well together. The Periwinkle is a bit of a contrast, but I really wanted to have that stark contrast on my flower. So I went in from the top and flicked in towards the medium and darkest color, and I'm going to go back in afterwards and do another layer. And the reason for this is when you're coloring with colored pencils, the idea is not to build up color due to pressure that you're putting on your hand, but rather to building up layer after layer and really getting those to blend together. So as you can see here, I'm all finished the first petal, and I've gone ahead and colored the entire flower panel. So I've left the leaves just as is, but I've gone in and colored these little flowers that you can see on the sides, tops, and bottoms, and I absolutely love the way that the colors show up on dark cardstock. I'm going to go ahead and mount this onto a card base. These are pre-cut and scored card bases from scrapbook.com. They come in a 25 pack and they just save me a lot of time. I'm going to use some glue here, and I'm going to ensure that my card panel is well glued and has a lot of adhesive on it because it warped just slightly under the heat tool, and I want to make sure that it really sticks to the card base so I get rid of any of that warp that may have happened. And that's the end of the very first card. I hope you enjoyed that one. Let's move on to the next 4 cards. This one was probably the most detailed in how long it took me to do, at about a half an hour with the coloring, but the rest of them were quite a bit shorter. So going into my second card now. To start off my second card, I'm going to be using the same floral stamp that I used on the first card. This time I'm going to stamp using some Catherine Pooler ink in Twilight. This is a medium gray color. And I'm going to stamp it twice onto my card background. So the first time at the top and the second time towards the bottom. After I finish stamping the 2 of the stamps here, I'm going to go in with the small floral stamp that also comes with this set and just add it in some areas where there's a lot of white space. When you are trying to stamp a background, the idea is to have them going off of the page so it looks more natural, rather than having them all sort of within the same frame. Now when I finish stamping the background, this is what it looked like. I'm now going to go ahead and set it off to the side here because I'm going to start working on some of the elements on the card. I'm going to be using the Waffle Flower Simply Said 1 stamp. This comes with coordinating dies for each one of the calligraphy written letters. I absolutely love the handwriting on it, and I like how they're really funly spaced out. I think it looks really different compared to the other sentiments that I have in my stash. And I'm going to grab one of these here. I'm going to grab the Hugs one, and I'm actually going to grab the coordinating die as well. So the idea I had for this one was to heat emboss this in white ink on 5 different colors of cardstock and then die cut it, so I had a nice rainbow of hugs going down the page. I grabbed a whole bunch of pieces of paper from my stash here. Most of it's Gina K Designs. I'm using Sweet Tangerine, Passionate Pink, Wild Cherry, Wild Lilac, and I'm also using a yellow. I don't know which brand the yellow is, but it's a bright yellow anyway. I'm going to cut off a strip from each and then get going on my stamping. Now I've gone ahead already. I've stamped this in Versamark ink. I'm going to cover it in some white embossing powder. This one's from Brutus Monroe Alabaster. And then I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss that. I'm going to heat it with my heat tool. I'm going to do this to all 5 of the card panels off screen. I figured since you probably know how to heat emboss already, and we already did it at the beginning of the video, there was no reason to go into great detail on this. I'm going to go ahead and line these up with their coordinating dies as well and run them through my die cutting machine. When they're all finished being die cut, then I end up with a whole bunch of sentiments that look like this. I'm going to arrange them in rainbow order from the top to the bottom of my card and then adhere them. I think these look really, really cool. I almost wished that there was a shadow to go behind them because I thought they looked a little bit lost, but when all the ink dried and the card was all finished and the ink sort of faded into the cardstock a bit, I thought it looked just fine in the end, and I think this is a really fun card. Off screen, I went ahead and I glued them all down, and then this was the card that I ended up with in the end. I love the rainbow look. I think it looks great against the gray, and I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. Moving on to card number 3. Now, I always find that when I'm prepping my classes for the Technique Resource Finder class, I have a link below in the description if you've never heard of it. It is an amazing class that I have put together, and I always find that each week or each class that I do, I always focus on a certain technique, and last time was masking, and I always seem to pull some of those techniques that I've recently done in that Technique Resource Finder class into the cards that I'm making. So today I decided to make a rainbow using some tape. So this is a really easy thing you can do, and it's pretty supply friendly. So I'm grabbing some purple tape. I'm working with 1.5 inch wide, mainly because it's going to protect my surface. I always find when I'm using just plain washi tape, it's not quite thick enough, and sometimes I end up going over the line and it makes a mess. So I wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to happen. I'm going to put my tape from corner to corner and get started. The ink colors that I'm using today for this card are Party Dress, Tiki Torch, Limoncello, All That Jazz, and Flirty Fuchsia. All 5 of them work into a pretty rainbow variety of colors. For time's sake, I am going to speed you up here. I am using some life-changing blender brushes from Picket Fence Studios, and I am laying down the ink. So I did Party Dress first in the center. I'm now realigning the purple tape. You should probably use your masking tape only once for this if you're a little bit unsure. I know purple and pink, when they mix together, aren't going to make a big deal though, so I knew that this was going to be okay in the end. So I ended up reusing my tape for every 2 colors. I knew purple and pink, when they mixed together, weren't going to make brown, so it was kind of okay to use it. And you'll notice I rotated the washi tape as well so that the side that didn't have as much ink on it was not exposed. Next up is Tiki Torch. Once again, I'm going to reuse this for the limoncello. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen when these 2 colors blend together is the yellow becomes a little bit more darker than usual. With these blending brushes, you don't need to worry about cleaning them. All you need to do is rub them off on a scrap piece of paper and they're all ready to go. I own the one complete full set of the brushes, and so I use one brush for yellows, one's for oranges, one is for blues, one's for greens, and I just rub them off whenever I'm switching between ink brands. So now you can see I have this rainbow here. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love the way that it looks against the white. I'm going to go ahead and stamp one of these stamps from the Sunflower Love stamp. This is the other floral cluster, and it comes with a nice little sentiment box in the center. Now, I thought that if I stamped my sentiment in the sentiment box, it would, 1, take away from the rainbow, and 2, it wouldn't show up very much. So what I decided to do was I grabbed one of the coordinating dies from the set. This is included if you buy the stamp and die set together. And I decided to die cut that out of a scrap piece of white paper. I'm going to stamp my sentiment on this area and then glue it on. So now it's going to pop against the rainbow rather than distract from it or get lost. And I think adding that white on top of a rainbow really makes everything pop even more. I think the rainbows just really came to life when I put that white piece of paper over top of them. The last thing I did was I went ahead and mounted this onto a white card base just as I did before, and then card number 3 is all finished and we can move on to card number 4. Now when I stamp with florals, I'm a really big fan of doing black and white cards, but I wanted to do something a little bit different that added some more detail than just doing a standard black and white card. So I started off by stamping the Sunflower Love cluster that we used in the very first card onto a scrap piece of paper or a card panel, and I die cut this using the coordinating dies, but I'm going to put that off to the side for now. I am going to wash my stamp in between each time that I'm doing this, and the reason why is I don't want any of the residue of the ink to get onto the cardstock when I'm trying to get the perfect placement. So I'm grabbing another card base now, and I'm going to cover the background as best as possible using this floral stamp. So I went ahead and I gave it a stamp at the very top. This is the area later that if you end up stamping this a little bit wrong, it's not an issue whatsoever. I went ahead and stamped it on the side, and then I turned it around again and stamped on the other side. Off screen, of course, I was fiddling with this and making sure it was in the right place. Going back now to our original one that we had stamped, I'm going to add the coordinating die, and then I'm going to die cut that off screen. Then I went ahead and I'm going to go ahead and add some 3D foam squares from scrapbook.com. I was sent these recently from scrapbook.com and I adore them. Why? Because they're easy to peel off and they're easy to peel off the backing. I find that I've been sent way too many foam adhesives where the backing is too hard to take off and you need fingernails or tweezers or something along those lines. These come off. I'm showing you this in real time. You can really see how easy these come off. Really no issue whatsoever, even on the small ones. They come in 2 sizes, small and the larger square, so about 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch, and then these smaller versions, and they also come in circles as well. I'm going to place the die cut that we had originally die cut. You know what I mean. The die that we have cut, and I am going to place that directly on top of the image that I stamped it on. So this gives it a 3D look, it adds some dimension, and it also gives it a bit of a shadow. I'm going to grab my scissors and just use the lines of the back of the cardstock here when I turn it around to trim off the excess areas. Then to add the sentiment, you can see the final product here of our background and how great that looks. I'm going to go ahead and stamp the thanks die from the Simply Said stamp set, and I'm going to cut it out using a coordinating die as well, and then I'm going to attach it to the very front of the card on the area that we had die cut and we have added our dimension. You could add dimension to this too, but I'm a little bit worried when I send it through the mail that it won't make it, so I'm just going to use some regular glue to adhere it down. Here is a final look at that card. I think it turned out absolutely gorgeous. Moving on to the last and final card, I think this one has the biggest wow impact. I'm going to be using some Inkadinkado masking paper today. If you're in my masking class, you know I didn't have this for the masking class and I kept talking about it and I love it and I had to order a bunch more packs. I ran out or I forgot it when I was moving. Anyway, it came in. I'm super excited and I'm going to go ahead and get started now. I'm going to start by inking up my stamp. I'm using this Sunflower Love again, and I'm going to stamp it directly on the white side of the masking paper, and then I'm going to use my scissors and I'm going to fussy cut this image. Now, can you use a coordinating die? Yes and no. So if you use a coordinating die, you're going to get white space around your image and the impact won't be as great. If you decide to fussy cut, of course it's going to take a lot longer and it depends on your cutting skills as to how this will turn out. But if you cut along the inside of the black line or directly on the black line, you should be fine. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this out off screen so you don't have to watch me, and then we have created our mask. So on my card panel now, I'm going to start working on an actual piece of cardstock. I am going to stamp this Sunflower Love stamp set, just like I did on our first card with the blue one, except for I put it up, I think, a little bit higher than that one. I'm going to ink it up using some Versafine Black Ink, and I'm going to stamp it onto the cardstock. Now, you can always go ahead and stamp this more than once if you want to get the lines a bit darker. It's completely up to you. I think the one time stamped just lovely, so I'm going to leave it as is. Next up, I am going to grab the masking paper. I'm going to peel off the plastic backing. This is really easy to peel off, I find, from the Inkadinkado masking paper. And this is definitely the masking paper I prefer out of all the different ones that I have tried. Sometimes they're just not sticky enough, sometimes they're too sticky, sometimes they're too thin. This one has always just been perfect and I've used it forever. So I'm going to go ahead and just line everything up here as best I can, and then we're going to get started on our next masking. Yes, that's right, I'm doing a double masking technique. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to mask the areas using purple tape. And it's going right directly over the masking paper. I'm going to use some Tiki Torch and some Limoncello ink, and I'm going to ink from the top and the bottom. And as I'm doing this, I'm already realizing that the top is not up high enough, meaning that the purple tape is over too much masking paper for me to make a really big contrast. So I ended up moving it up a little bit in just a second in order to ensure that I would get some more color. So I'm really trying to deepen that color, give it a really beautiful sort of almost like a sunrise tone to it. I'm going to very carefully peel off that purple tape. The masking paper came up with it a little bit on areas where there was just a little bit, and it ripped the masking paper just slightly, but not enough that it actually ruined my mask. So I was really happy about that. Always when you're attempting card surgery, it's risky business. I'm going to just put it up slightly higher than I did before and just add in a little bit more color, and I'm going to really hope that the somewhat of the areas where I have a line are not going to be too much affected when it's all said and done. And you're going to see what I mean in just a second when I remove the masks as to why it was important for me to get a little bit more color at the very top. I think in the end, if I wouldn't have done this, it would have looked just fine as well, but I was just being my picky self and decided to do it. Now this comes the fun part, where we get to lift off the masks and see what our creation has just made. So make sure that if you need to wash your hands, that you wash your hands, because now we're working with a lot of white space and we don't want to get any fingerprints anywhere. So I'm going to peel up the purple tape. If it happens to peel up your mask at the same time, that's fine. You'll notice I'm peeling sideways and I'm going slowly and I'm going really close to the paper. I don't want anything to accidentally rip my cardstock. And my masking paper is quite saturated at the moment, so it's got a lot of ink on it, so it started to rip in certain places, but that does not matter in any way. As long as you can get it off in the end, there really is no big deal with ripping your mask, unless you're planning on using it again, but since I used a lot of ink here, it probably wasn't going to happen anyway. Now you'll see the end result of the masking and how gorgeous that is. I absolutely adore it. So here's a final look at that card. I went ahead and stamped hello as my sentiment, and I mounted it on a card base. Here's a final look before we go into the recap of all the cards. Let me know below in the description if there's a certain card you loved or a certain technique you enjoyed. The first card, we did the gold embossing with the colored pencils on a dark colored cardstock with the sentiment hugs. I absolutely love this card. I think it's super, super gorgeous. The next card that we did here was the subtle gray background. You can see how much it's faded now that it's dried, and then all of the rainbow hugs background with the white embossing powder on it. Very fun and very happy card, I think. Even happier is card number 3, where we did the rainbow background on a diagonal and stamped the beautiful floral over top with the hello sentiment in the white frame. And I absolutely love this one too. I think all of these cards I absolutely loved. I was super inspired by this stamp set, if you can't tell already. Card number 4 was the black and white card with dimension, where we had die cut a separate stamp to prop it up to add that shadow there at the bottom. The beautiful thanks sentiment already die cut. It's absolutely gorgeous. I love the way that this one turned out. And it's a really just showstopper as far as the black and white goes, and not having any color I think really is this card's strong point, but of course you could do any sort of coloring you want on this particular background. It would look great as well, I'm sure. Now to finish off with the card that we just finished here, the black and white double masking technique. I absolutely love the white flowers here, how they pop so much off the page with the yellows and the oranges in the background. And the double masking technique was also super fun when we put the mask on the flower and then masked off using the purple tape, creating these really beautiful lines. And I think in the end, this card was a really big treat as well to make. And it looks absolutely gorgeous on the shelf in the craft room. I don't even know if I'm gonna send this one. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you're interested, you can go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Click on the suggested video below if you want to keep watching, and thanks again for tuning in. Bye for now.